These unconventional times require unconventional conversations. Listen in as your host, Richard Gordon, engages in one-on-one conversations with numerous leaders, elected officials, politicians, and others to learn what's happening in your state, on the Hill, and across America. Now, here's the host of Unconventional Times, Richard Gordon.
Hello, and welcome to Unconventional Times. I'm your host, Richard Gordon. You know, energy is one of the most important issues of our time. So much of our lives are dependent on the creation, the transmission, and the use of our energy resources. Doing it wisely is not only important for our economy, but the sustainability of our planet. No one has been a greater leader. No one has been a greater leader than our guest today, Jennifer Granholm. If I took the time to read the list of her accomplishments and her titles, I don't think we'd have time to do the rest of the show.
Just get on with it, man.
She's waving at me. So let me just tell you folks at home who may not know. Attorney General of the state of Michigan, Governor of the state of Michigan, the United States Secretary of the Energy under Joe Biden, and now is the head of Granholm Energy, a clean energy advisory firm that gives strategic counseling to companies and organizations on clean energy and infrastructure. So, Governor Granholm, Secretary Granholm, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Richard. So great to be on. Thanks for the invitation.
Always. It's great to see you, as always. Let me just start with something really simple. Public life. I mean, why did you make the decision you made to go into public life? So much of your career has been, you could have had an outstanding career in the law, obviously, and done that, but you decided to go a different path. I'm always interested in why people choose this.
Well, I mean, I did start out as a lawyer. I went to law school and was really sort of specializing in civil rights law. So I wanted to, my parent, it's the same thing. Parents tell their kids, you're here to make the world better, leave it a better place than when you found it. So, but I was really so moved by the civil rights movement and by really attempting to be a voice for the underdog. And, it's so funny when I think about it now. When you raise your hand to decide to go into public service, whether you're actually elected or you're just in a role that is serving in some way, it was, it was considered this noble endeavor. This, you were, it was like a calling.
It's a calling. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. And today, in addition to just being called, you have to have an amazing amount of courage to enter into the fray because of the internet and potentially your family being targeted or you being targeted. It was different. It was different back then. It was different in the 80s and 90s when I
kinder time.
Yeah, it was a kinder, gentler time. It really was. So for those who are running today, I really have such deep respect for those who are willing to suffer the slings and arrows. I mean, there were a lot of slings and arrows, don't get me wrong, but it just, the volume is just really is overwhelming today.
But to put yourself out there as an elective is also different. To put yourself, there's one thing about serving in an appointed position. To put yourself out there in front of the public in an elective position.
Well,
why do you make that switch?
Yeah, you have to really have thick skin, no matter what. I mean, Hillary Clinton used to say that you have to have skin as thick as a rhinoceros. You really do. You got to realize that the attacks that are coming in are not about you. That they are about stopping the agenda that you want to put forward potentially. And so if you depersonalize it a bit, it makes it much more doable. And in fact, it gives you motivation to move forward if you believe in your platform, et cetera. And for me, I was a public attorney. I was the corporation counsel for Wayne County, which is the county in which Detroit sits. And we were working on all sorts of things to really try to lift people's means, et cetera. Even, at a time when we're talking now about affordability and costs, we were doing the same thing, especially because Detroit was so challenged. But then I was I then went and became assistant U.S. attorney. So I worked in the criminal space. I was in the civil space, and because I had civil and criminal experience, when the Attorney General of Michigan, whose name is Frank Kelly,
Been there forever.
right. He was served 37 years. He was called not the Attorney General, but the Eternal General. Well, term limits finally kicked in, and he had to step down. And the party came to me because I had that balance of civil and criminal experience. I said, "Would you consider running?" And I was like, "No, I'm not going to run for office. Why? I was interested in making change, but behind the scenes." But when I talked to my husband about it, and we had three small children, he was like, "Are you kidding? When the door opens, you go through it. I've got the kids, etc." So he was a champion for me in helping to make that decision easier. And so I accepted, and I was only Attorney General for one term because then the governor's role became available, and I was the only statewide elected Democrat serving in a state position. And so, everybody's like, "Well, you got to run for governor. You got to run for governor." And I was back to the same, "But I have a great job. I really love this job, etc." But ultimately, because the situation in Michigan was becoming so challenging because of the loss of manufacturing jobs,
Right.
and because of, the struggles that the auto industry was facing, I said, "Okay, I'll run for governor," and the rest is a bit of history. But it's been a huge honor to have served in such, really impactful positions. I wish for all young people that they have the opportunity to really serve in a way that creates meaning for people, real people.
Well, it starts with a desire to serve. I think that's the starting point. I want to get into Michigan a little bit. I want to talk about what was going on when you were governor. But first, I have to ask you, what is it about Michigan? You were the first female attorney general, the first female governor. First of all, let's say, is that important? Is being the first in any of those things important? And why is it important?
Well, I mean, I think it's really sends a signal to those who come behind that this is, once you busted through a glass ceiling, it's open for everybody. As Jesse Jackson would say, once the door opens for someone, it opens wider for everybody else. So, of course, there's symbolic significance to that. However, I didn't run as, I mean, I am a woman, so
Sure.
no getting around it. But I didn't like campaign on those issues. It was really about what people were experiencing on the ground. But I'm glad, I mean, we've had Gretchen Whitmer is the governor now,
Right.
and she was the Senate minority leader when I was governor. So we worked together in that role. And I'm so glad that, it's no big deal anymore in Michigan that there are women leaders. We've got a woman now who's the second female attorney general. We've got a woman who's secretary of state, all these great women leaders in Michigan. And, I'm so happy that it's not a big deal.
And that's the
That's,
way it should be, shouldn't it?
yeah,
I
it's
mean,
exactly. I mean, it should
it's
be
the person,
anybody.
it's the character of the person, not
Right,
the
right.
whatever.
Not the shape of their plumbing, as I say.
I don't know if I've heard that exactly, and it looks like there might be another female governor of Michigan
Yeah,
soon.
that's
So
right.
it looks that way. Look, you brought it up. You were governor during an extraordinarily a difficult time not just for Michigan, a difficult time for the country. It was the period of the Great Recession. States were losing jobs. Michigan's sort of unique. I mean, the auto industry, the manufacturing, and whatnot. What I want to get to on that is, the economy was crippled. How did you first start dealing with that? I mean, what a
Well,
awful situation.
yeah, I mean, really, from the first year I was in office, it was clear, not just in the auto industry, but in the manufacturing sector overall, that frankly, I mean, China's entry into the WTO and these free trade agreements were so damaging to the industrial Midwest.
Mm.
And the hollowing out of communities that we saw was heartbreaking. I mean, my first year, just a quick story, my first year in office, I get a call from our Michigan Economic Development Corporation, which is the entity that works with companies to be successful in Michigan. And they said, hey, Gov, we got a big problem because there is a little tiny town called Greenville, Michigan, a town of 8,000 people. And it is about to lose a major employer. It was Electrolux, the largest refrigerator factory in North America, was in
And
this
vacuum
little
cleaners.
town. Well, actually, they were making refrigerators at this
Ah,
place, at this particular place.
ah,
But it, it's a town of 8,000 and 3,000 people worked at the factory. So as you can imagine, it was like a one company town, and they were so proud of this factory. But they were about to make a decision to go to Mexico, where they could pay $1.57 an hour. And we went when I heard this, I was like, oh, this is not going to happen on my watch. I'm a new governor. We're going to take my whole cabinet to Greenville. We'll sit down with Electrolux. We'll make them an offer they can't refuse. We'll, in fact, we put an incredible amount of incentives on the table. We offered to build them a new factory. The UAW, who represented the workers, gave so much in concessions. They didn't want anyone else to know how much they were willing to sacrifice in order to keep these jobs. And I just remember so distinctly at the meeting, we gave them this list of incentives. They took our list. They went outside the room for 17 minutes. They came back in and they said, wow, this is the most generous any community has ever been to try to keep a factory. But there's nothing you can do to compensate for the fact that we can pay $1.57 an hour in Juarez, Mexico. And so they left. And on the month that the last refrigerator came off the assembly line, the community had a gathering that they called the Last Supper. It was at Clackle's Orchard Pavilion. I was not invited, but I went because I was grieving alongside of them, alongside them. And I go into Clackle's Orchard Pavilion, and everybody's sitting around, 8 top tables, eating out of sort of box lunches. There's a sad band playing, sad music, but and kind of sad too. But I go up to the first table, and this guy stands up, and he says, "Gov," he says, "I have worked at this factory for 30 years. I'm 48 years old. I went from high school to factory. Here are my 2 teenage daughters." He brought them next to him, and he said, Gov, my father worked at this factory. My grandfather worked at this factory. All I know is how to make refrigerators. And then he looked at his kids and he put his hands on his chest like this. So, Gov, tell me, who is ever going to hire me? Who's ever going to hire me? And that question was asked by everybody in Clackle's Orchard Pavilion that day. And frankly, by everybody in one of the 60,000 communities that have lost factories in the first decade and a half of this century. So this was the sort of canary in the coal mine for me for what was going to happen in Michigan. And so before the auto industry went bankrupt, the suppliers to the auto industry went bankrupt. It was a rolling series of bankruptcies or movement of jobs away from Michigan. And so it was really hard. It was a really hard period of time, not just for me, but of course for the citizens as they were looking to see what's the future for Michigan. So I focused entirely on diversifying our economy, not away from manufacturing, but into advanced manufacturing, into, we already knew we were the home of the auto industry, but what is auto industry 2.0? What does vehicle 2.0 look like? And that was the electric vehicle. And so we got busy on all things clean energy, including EVs, to be able to diversify the state and try to hang on to what made us special, but also be able to expand into industries of the future.
We could do an entire show on what our trade agreements, mostly by Democratic presidents, have done to
Yeah.
the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And why the party is where it is today and why so
I
many
think,
people have left it.
it's so much, there's so much there. I mean, I campaigned on NAFTA and CAFTA have given
Of
us the
course.
shafta because that's what people feel.
Yeah.
Trump understood this. I mean, when he came in and talked about these trade agreements that have caused jobs to go away, people felt like, somebody finally gets me. And
Yeah, they're hearing me.
even though his solutions have not been, effective, but nonetheless, they felt like they were seen and heard.
You were governor during the bailout of the auto industry. What
I
was that
was.
like? What was the
Call it the
negotiation?
rescue, the rescue.
The rescue, excuse me. Yes, I forgot. It's no
Uh,
longer, yes, of
yeah,
course.
yeah. No, that
Tell
was,
me about the rescue and your
yeah.
involvement.
It was amazing. I mean, this was just as Obama comes into office, right? So if you recall, the Great Recession happens with the banking industry going south, right? In 2000, at the end of 2008. And
Right.
then in 2009, Obama comes into office. And I was like a dog on a bone on this because it meant, for us, it was everything. It was our identity. It was our DNA. It was our jobs. It was everything. And so that was a really, really, I mean, I made my way back and forth to Washington, D.C. In fact, I worked with the person who was the deputy for the rescue. And so Steve Ratner was in charge.
Right, of
And
course.
his deputy was a young woman named Haley Stevenson.
Oh, wow.
And she ends up running now, right now, she's running
Then,
for US Senate. She's a member of
right,
Congress. But
right.
but the whole point is that making the case, because some inside the Obama administration didn't want to save the auto industry. They wanted to just let free trade, have its way, and that's just the fallout, and that's where it is. And it took a lot of people inside to be able to persuade. I was one voice, but there were a lot of voices inside saying, you've got, if we're going to do anything, can we save this auto industry? What are we going to do? Just give it away to Mexico or to China or to anybody else? So it was quite an effort. And I'm so glad when they actually, I mean, the Obama industry made such a great deal with the auto industry in that it was a loan. Loan has been paid back in full, but the loan was tied to conditions of diversifying into electric vehicles, for example, to
Right.
move into more fuel efficient vehicles. And that was, I think, a really smart move because it really did launch the beginnings of the batteries in the auto industry for electric vehicles in Michigan.
You were so far ahead of your time. I mean, no, seriously. I mean,
No,
like
no, I laugh because you're totally right. No, it wasn't me, but we put
you're
for
10 years ahead
EVs.
of everyone else on
Yeah.
this one.
Well, I joke that we put the cart of supply before the horse of demand a little
Yes.
bit on EVs. We were gung ho on making these batteries, but no one was buying EVs at the point,
But how did you
right?
know that? How did you know that that was a solution? I mean, I've wanted to ask you this question for years now. I mean, you took and this is really illustrative, I think, of other problems we face. You took a very serious problem. The major manufacturers in your state were going bankrupt, were going to go out of business, and you turned it into a tremendous positive for the next generation of how do you create this? How do you created 90,000 green jobs
Yeah.
while you were, that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, we really saw where the puck was headed. It was
Spoken like a
clear.
Michigander. There you
Yeah, I
go.
mean, but it's funny because even then, it was clear that China had its eyes on dominating. Now, at that point, it was largely the solar industry that they had their eyes on dominating. In fact, in that little town of Greenville, we
Hmm.
recruited a big solar factory to come and sit on the site of the Electrolux factory, and that was great. There were two
Right.
buildings, they were hiring people, but then China came and bought the company. So Greenville saw two huge losses
Oh,
because the
wow.
Chinese came in. And so I was, this is what's so interesting to me is that this latest openness to having an industrial strategy in America is really significant because states alone, back when I was governor, there was no federal partner other than when Obama came in to save the auto
Right.
industry. But we didn't have like joint federal state incentives to make manufacturing successful in America in this global economy. We were up against China. And it was like bringing a knife to a gunfight until actually President Biden came in and passed the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law. That was significant industrial strategy. States, here's what I would do as governor. I'd go to Texas and I would say, hey, you guys, you don't do a whole lot of manufacturing, although they did, of course. Come to Michigan. We'll make you a
Right.
deal. I'd go to California. Oh, you guys, you don't want to make, stuff
Too many
here. It's too
taxes.
expensive. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Come to Michigan. We'll make you a deal.
Right.
But but all the governors were doing this, right? So it was like moving the chairs around on the deck of the
Right.
Titanic. As a nation, it was a terrible national strategy, right? So I'm glad that there's an openness now to realizing that it's important for a nation to manufacture things in order to be strong, that it's important for a nation to compete globally, and that you may have to have public-private partnerships in order to make these companies successful in the United States. So anyway, it was a really eye-opening time, and
Hmm.
it was a great grounding for me in preparation for becoming energy secretary.
I want to get to that in a second. You talked about supply chain years before. I mean, I think the first time I ever really heard the word supply chain was during COVID. But, when you look at some of the things you were talking about back then, with the suppliers for the auto industry,
Oh
you
my God.
understood that they couldn't make it without these people. And I know when I was working in Indiana, how we used to try to structure the component parts to come co-locate, like with United
Exactly.
Airlines or whatever. I mean,
Yes.
that's how you keep them strong.
Yes,
So,
yes, that's it. You create an industrial cluster. In fact, I did a huge amount of international travel because we would identify, for example, for a battery for electric vehicles, you need an anode, cathode, separator material, and electrolyte. Who's making that? And I'd go to South Korea, I'd go to Japan, I'd go to Germany and say, look, we are creating an industrial cluster. You're doing this particular thing. Come to the United States. So we had a lot of inbound investment to create that full supply chain. At the same time as we were doing this, of course, some of the biggest suppliers, traditional suppliers to the auto industry, were going bankrupt, like Delphi Automotive, which was the
right.
biggest bankruptcy before the auto industry ended up going bankrupt. So it was, we were juggling a lot at the same time.
Trying to make it all balance.
Yeah.
I'm curious, I know a lot of people were pushing you after the governorship to run for something else. You never did. Just
Mhm.
curious why.
Well, I've certainly asked to run for Senate, but
A few times.
yeah, but I am an executive. I am
Yeah,
not a legislative person. I have to, I have to do. And
yeah.
I know that I would have been profoundly unhappy in a situation where I was one of, many who were trying to get a bill passed rather than actually implementing. So just my disposition is not a legislative one.
I think all our friends who were governors went to the Senate have never been happy.
I
I mean,
know. Talk to Joe Manchin. I mean,
oh,
he'll
please. I
tell you.
told him not to run. I told him he would be miserable. I think
Yeah.
my exact quote to him, he told me he was going to run, and I said, friends don't let friends run for the Senate.
Oh, it's so true. I mean, when I think about the folks who like John Hoeven,
Right.
Mike Rounds, who are all Republican senators, but they, I mean, they all will tell you that their favorite job was being governor.
Oh my goodness. I think I learned the difference between the two jobs when I was staying at my friend, you remember Evan Bayh, when I was staying at his house when he was governor, and the phone rang constantly. When I stayed at his house when he was a senator, phone never rang. It's just like a completely different world.
Yeah,
It's
it
like,
is.
when you're governor, you're it.
You're
You're
on
the
it.
CEO.
Yeah.
Um, so now let me shift, Madam Secretary, and let's talk about your time at the uh, United States Department of Energy. It's interesting. Well, first of all, I'd like to know what it was like when Joe Biden called you on the phone and asked you to
Eh,
do this. I mean, were you
Listen,
shocked? I mean, I know you were out campaigning, you were working for him, you were doing all types of
it's
stuff.
funny. I have so when Joe Biden was running as Obama's vice president,
Hmm.
they asked me to be Sarah Palin in the debate prep for
Well, I
him,
remember that.
right?
Yeah, sure.
So I got close to him then, and when
Was Tina Fey busy or something? Or
I know, right? She did it so much better than I did. But nonetheless, it was a great opportunity to really get to know him and him me. And then when the Obama administration had a whole series of competitions among states to get batteries for electric vehicles, Michigan won a huge number of them. And Joe Biden was in Michigan all the time giving us those grants. So I had a really good relationship with him, obviously campaigned for him and everything. So I was so happy because this was the job. This was my dream job to be energy secretary. It was right on the path of what we were doing in Michigan and creating an opportunity to build clean energy products in the United States. And so I was so honored to be able to say yes. And I did so immediately because I knew it would be the best job. And in fact, it is the best job I have ever had with the best
Really?
boss. Yeah, ever. I
I
mean,
didn't ask
better
you that.
than even, well, governor was so hard. It was such
Yeah.
a hard time because of the Great Recession. And as secretary, because of the bills that were passed in energy, it was the most significant bills for clean manufacturing in the United States in the history of the country. Well, honestly, the most significant impact in terms of climate policy in the world. We had resources, the full support of the boss, and we saw amazing impacts. It was, I mean, I hope we can talk about that a little bit because honestly,
Yeah.
it's Exhibit A that if it's done right, industrial strategy really does work.
Did you know going in that he was largely going to take the Michigan model, the Granholm model, and make that the national model? Did you know that he was was that part of the discussion of
Well,
how he was
let me
going
just
to
say,
be?
I mean, I wouldn't say it was he would take the Michigan model, but I do know part of the discussion was was super interested in manufacturing in the United States and in having this clean energy boom. All these states had signed on, right, to the Paris Accords, and what did it mean? It meant that every country had signed on. Uh, every country was going to need the products that would help them to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, to generate clean energy. And who was better to be able to build it than us in the United States? Obviously, Michigan at the top of the heap on that, but every state could benefit. And so Joe Biden from Scranton, PA, he understood that these trade agreements had damaged the ability to be able to manufacture in the United States without some support from the federal government to make these companies successful. And so he was all in on making that happen, and it was crafted in a way that had amazing results. Can I just talk about that for a second? Because
I
I
want
think,
to, sure, you saved me a question. I was just about
okay,
to ask you. I mean, you had billions of dollars you were investing.
yeah,
It was just
this is,
amazing. I'd love to hear you talk about it.
yeah, I mean, this is, it was just took a look at the Inflation Reduction Act, which is really an act that was focused on tax credits. So the tax credits associated with, let's just say, a solar developer wanted to do a solar farm, right? And we wanted to get that clean energy on the grid, et cetera. They decide to do their solar project and they get a 30% tax credit, which is transferable. So meaning it's not just, a tax deduction. It is really a partnership with the federal government to make this
Right.
go. If they located that solar farm in a community that had previously been a coal community or a fossil fuel community, they got another 10%. So now it's a 40% tax credit. If they use domestic materials, so it's their supply chain is US, that's another 10%. Now it's a 50% tax credit to be able to do this. And that's true with both generating solar power as well as manufacturing solar panels. And so it made the United States irresistible, not just for solar, but for wind, for EVs, for batteries, you name it, for a nuclear. I mean, we created this suite of incentives that made us the destination. Our allies around the world were ticked off at us because they felt like, oh, we can't compete with this. And we're like, look, everybody can get in the game. But for us, this was really important to restore manufacturing. So between the time that the Inflation Reduction Act was passed and the December of 2024, the last month in office, which was about, 2 years, basically,
Right.
2.5 years,
Right.
we saw just in the clean energy space, 950 factories announced they were coming to America or expanding in America to make clean energy products. That was millions of jobs. That was
Right.
amazing. And unfortunately, I will say this, the it takes a while to make an announcement, right? That you've got to do some siting reconnaissance, you've got to figure out where you're going to. So by the time the people were saying, I'm going to manufacture in the United States, it might have been closer to the tail end of the administration. So we
Right.
were seeing a lot of, a lot of groundbreakings, but not a lot of ribbon cuttings. And
It
so
takes years. It takes time.
it takes time, and so
Yeah.
consequently, people weren't really feeling how the impact. I mean, if unfortunately, the Trump administration came in and undid a bit of this, not everything, but a bit of this, and so there were a lot of grants that were rescinded, et cetera. But it was an amazing strategy that really had enormous impact. And so one, manufacturing renaissance in the United States as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act. And number two, the thing I'm really proud of is that we added more clean energy to the US grid than at any time in history. So, just in our last year, we added 30 Hoover dams worth of clean energy to the electricity grid. So those two things, the manufacturing renaissance and the addition of clean generation, were two things that I'm most proud of as energy secretary.
A truly amazing accomplishment. Explain to the public, though. I think some of the people don't totally understand what the grid means. And you spent a lot of time, modernization of the grid was a major thing for you.
Yeah.
What is that? What does it mean? Why, for me sitting at home listening to this, should I care?
People don't care about the grid. You're totally right. They just want to
Yeah,
turn on the lights and have,
of course.
illumination. But they do care when there's a blackout. They do care if there is some sort of cyber attack, and they do want to be able to breathe clean air. And so, if, there's all this hullabaloo about data centers, right? And so 70% of Americans are against data centers. But when you say, if you put some guardrails around that and they are powered by clean energy and they don't force their costs on the rate base, so your rates are not going to go up, people start to become more receptive to it, and you can get over 50 to 60% depending on the guardrails that you put around it. People like clean. They do.
Right.
They don't want to, and so the notion of, forcing, for example, uneconomical coal plants to stay open when they are polluting and causing your rates to go up, people don't like that. But the grid itself is where all of this stuff passes across. And if we don't have, your grid, the biggest chunk of your energy bill is on the amount of money your utility spends on upgrading your poles and wires, your distribution and transmission wires, but mostly it's distribution, the stuff that connects you to your house, because they were built in many cases built in the 50s, and they're on,
50s, yeah.
wooden poles, and they need to be upgraded. So yeah, we did a lot of work on grid modernization. And when I say that, I mean, yes, we need to do transmission wires, et cetera, but what if we could push twice as much power on the existing grid by using a special type of wire that allows you to really push more? It's called reconductoring. What if we were able to introduce technology that allows power? Right now, the grid is pretty dumb. It just power
Okay.
flows or it doesn't flow. But what if we were able to move power to the places that need it most through what is known as dynamic line rating, et cetera? So these kind of tools can have us squeeze so much more efficiency out of the grid that we have, which is exactly what you want. At any given time, the grid is half full. Basically, right now, as we're talking, the grid is about 50% in use. Why? Because we build the grid for the worst case scenarios. We build it for it's like a Walmart parking lot that's built for, the day before Christmas when it has to be totally full. But the rest of the year, you can find a
Must be
spot,
empty.
it's
Yeah.
just, that's what the grid is like. But what if you could use that headroom in a much more efficient way? And so that's what we were focused on, is how to make the grid more efficient. How do we lower costs for people? And every single candidate who is running for governor, for president, for anything should be talking about how we can be more efficient with the grid that we have, rather than building, 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 and having you pay for stuff that may not be necessary.
Well, you bring up a ton of things, so we're going to take them one at a time here. How do we get to the smart grid? How do we get there? Who's paying for it? Is that a taxpayer thing? Is it the federal government? Is it the
Mhm.
utilities? Who's paying for it?
Well, let's just say this. there were grants, et cetera, to states to be able to do a lot of this. But generally, what happens is it's paid for by the ratepayer, by
Right.
the customer, right? So the way, unfortunately, we've got a weird and sort of counterintuitive business model that the utilities are compensated for the amount of stuff they build. They're not rewarded for saving. And so
Mm.
that's got to change. So across the country, and this is why I say governors have to take a look at this. If utilities could be a partner in lowering costs rather than just being compensated for building more poles and wires and the most expensive types of investments, that would mean that the utilities could be a shared, you could have shared savings and they could be rewarded for that rather than just build, spread that cost. And that's why everybody's rates have gone up, is because the utility business model is sort of on its head. But in this new moment, when we're talking about saving money for people, there are a lot of utilities that are like, all right, how can we do this right? And there needs to be a law. I mean, they're just operating within the law. It's not like they're, malfeasance or anything like that. It's just the way we've always done it. But we are looking at, like, for example, with Governor Sherrill in New Jersey,
Hmm.
she ran on a
I
rate
know you're
freeze.
advising her.
Yeah, I was co-chair of her transition
Right.
team in energy, but she has asked the Board of Public Utilities, which is the regulator in New Jersey, and has appointed a new chair, and they are going to be looking at every way that we can make more efficient use out of the existing grid and have more generation of clean energy happen inside New Jersey, so they don't have to get power from the most expensive place, which is unfortunately the regional transmission organization called PJM, which is extremely expensive. So
Right.
she's looking at all ways to be able to bring down costs for people. I'm super excited about it because what if? And this has started. This conversation has started at the Board of Public Utilities. What if you have, say, for example, a data center who wants to come to New Jersey? What if that data center company, it's one of the big tech firms, say it's Google or whatever, what if they say, look, we're going to need a lot of power. We're going to need a gigawatt of power. That's a huge amount. But we don't want ratepayers to have to pay for it. But what we'll do is we will give 40,000 people who are in the vicinity around a data center that's proposed, we will give them a home battery and a solar system, or we'll subsidize an electric vehicle that they can purchase if they get compensated by the utility for being a mini power plant. You cobble all those batteries together and they become essentially a power plant. It's called a virtual power plant. And the customer can get compensated for, if they participate, for charging their vehicle at times when it makes more sense, when there's not such demand pull on the grid, for example. For having, for giving the utility access to the battery so that you don't have to build, but you can use this. And in Vermont, Green Mountain Power, they do this, and the customer gets between $50 and $100 a month for access to their battery. They don't largely even know this is happening. They just say, just make sure
This
I
is
have
while they're
it
charging it at night.
while they're charging it at
Once
night.
Yeah.
Right. And they can get a couple $1,000s a year, maybe 1,000,
Wow.
So now you're talking about the customer really paying attention, because if you can make money and the hyperscaler pays for it, now that's is really, really interesting. So all of this is happening right now, Richard. All of this conversation about how to make data centers more acceptable, but also how to smartly use the existing assets that are on the grid, like electric vehicles, like home batteries.
A lot of people say that data centers aren't even necessary. I listen to these people, all
Mm.
the time arguing that they're not necessary. We don't need them. It sounds from like what you're saying, you disagree with that analysis.
Well, I mean, I think we do need. I mean,
I
you
mean, I don't
want
know how my
your.
phone would work. I don't know
Yeah,
how we
I don't.
would talk.
You need to have a data center if you're going to be using the
Yeah,
technology. I get that people have. I certainly understand people's fear of AI,
Sure.
And they're concerned about job losses, et cetera, and they're concerned about their children's access to, the more malevolent uses of AI. Those should be addressed. There needs to be guardrails around that, and we need to do a better job of training workers and getting apprentices to be able to use AI in order for them to get better jobs. But I do think that the data centers themselves, if they are done right,
Hmm.
they can actually lower costs for people. It's like, in fact, there's a number of studies that have been done by the Brattle Group, by Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, et cetera, that says that for every gigawatt of power that a data center uses or that they demand, the rates for everyday citizens can be lowered by 1 to 2%. Why is that? Because the data center ends up paying for the grid. And so that payment gets socialized across the rate base, and it puts downward pressure on rates. There's a lot of work being done, for example, by Princeton, Jesse Jenkins, who's in New Jersey, and just a genius on this. There's just so much that a data center could bring to a community. Again, if the guardrails are right, they have to not use, they have to have smart water usage, not just suck up all the water. So a closed loop system, or advanced air cooling. They have to agree to pay for the grid upgrades that are necessary to connect the data center but they can also enter into community benefit agreements, and communities can decide, what is it that I want, that where the data center can actually be a partner. In Louisiana, this is sort of interesting to me, because the data center pays taxes, and you see a huge increase in the tax receipts from a municipality. In Louisiana, in one parish where there's a data center coming in, the teachers got $50,000 bonuses because of all of the increased tax revenues.
Revenue, yeah.
So,
They had the money. Well, what would happen, with this behind the meter? So if the data center is its own power plant, does not attach to the grid
mhm.
necessarily, or just secondarily attaches it, and then could have extra power that it gives to the community or sells at a
Yeah,
cheap rate.
yeah. I
Does
mean,
that work as well?
it does in some cases. Here's what I'll say about that is that most data centers actually do want to be connected to the grid because they want to make sure that they can have access to clean power, and it's cheaper to be connected to the grid as long as you are not requiring or not, having customers pay for the power that you are using. But like in Minnesota, they just had announced a big data center, and the data center bought a huge series of long duration energy batteries, basically, that the utility could use to be able to stabilize the grid and become essentially a grid asset, if you will. And so data centers, if they're done right, they can help the grid, they can help citizens, and they can help to bring clean power to an area. And by the way, huge amount of jobs in terms of construction jobs and apprentice opportunities. There's a couple hundred jobs inside of the data center itself, but from a training point of view and a community, I mean, if a community could get preference for apprenticeships for their young people to learn how to learn a trade, an electrician, et cetera, that's a lifelong skill that can be used not just at that data center, but of course anywhere.
Especially in these communities where all the children leave. We're
Yeah,
having this problem all over the country where the children grow up and can't get jobs and move
right,
elsewhere.
right, right.
Let me move you because we only have a few minutes. You raised something that I'm going to call a yo-yo effect, where one administration does something, the next administration changes it, the next administration. How does this work? I mean, we're talking about massive, massive investments. I mean, billions and billions of dollars, where
Mhm.
one administration thinks it's okay to drill for oil constantly and in our national parks and elsewhere, and another one wants to use solar and other green energy. How does that work? How do we create a system in our country where we're going, like I said, a yo-yo back and forth?
Yeah, I think it's been most dramatic, right, in this administration and the previous administration, this yo-yo, although of course it's happened over history too. as they say, elections have consequences, and this is the consequence. I don't know that everybody was assuming that there would be such a massive reversal from one administration to the other. I think if you ask people from a policy perspective, do they want to have clean energy? Do they want to use the sun, which is free, to be able to
Right.
power? Do they want to be able to build these things in America? Do they want to be able to have wind? I mean, the war on wind is just crazy. It's free fuel, and
But is
why?
it enough? Is it enough? People are going to listen to this and say, yeah, but it gets cloudy.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, for sure. And
sometimes
that's
the wind
why.
doesn't blow,
For sure, 100%. And that's why you've got batteries. I mean, this is the
Right.
great thing about the battery industry and the incredible uptick in the purchase of batteries by utilities to be able to say, yes, if it's not a sunny day, we can use this 100-hour battery to be able to stabilize. If it's not a windy day, we do that. And obviously, sometimes the wind and the sun sort of work in connection with one another,
Sure.
and maybe windy when the sun is not shining, and maybe sunny when the wind is not blowing. But nonetheless, you can totally do this with clean energy, or you can use nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is a big deal. New Jersey, I mean, Governor Sherrill just lifted the moratorium on nuclear, and I think that's a really important thing. Hydroelectric power, same thing, using dams. Those are baseload power, geothermal power, the heat beneath our feet, all kinds of clean energy. It doesn't just have to be wind and solar, although wind and solar are hugely important. So the bottom line is, this administration, when they came in, they decided to back off on electric vehicles, solar, and wind. Those are basically the three. But they kept the tax credits for nuclear. They kept the tax credits for geothermal. They kept the tax credits for long duration energy storage for batteries, which
Right.
was great. So now you're seeing the auto industry, for example, that was building batteries for electric vehicles are now building batteries for utilities, which is an important pivot given the circumstances, given the policy circumstances. And here's the perverse outcome, the unintended outcome of all of these changes, Richard, is that when they took away the tax credits for solar, for example, on July 1st, there's a cutoff. You will not, of this year, you will
Right.
not be able to have any more solar tax credits unless your project was under construction. So guess what? All of these developers hurried to get their projects under construction to be safe harbored so that they can access these tax credits. So we added, as I mentioned, 30 Hoover Dams worth of clean power at the end of 2024. That's 60 gigawatts. This year, because everybody rushing to take advantage of the tax credits before they expire, we're going to add 86 gigawatts. So
Wow.
43 Hoover Dams worth of clean
Right.
power because the private sector was so much wanted to take advantage of the tax credits. So
I wonder who's going to take credit for it.
well, Trump ends up being the biggest friend to clean energy and renewable energy. Who knew? And this is true around the world too, by the way. I mean, there's a
Funny.
huge push because of the Strait of Hormuz and the closing and the cost of oil. You're seeing the whole world really accelerate this notion of energy sovereignty by turning to clean energy, homegrown energy.
I know you can't be president because you were born in Canada. Because I'm going to get a lot of phone calls like, wow, she's great. She should be president.
Oh,
A 32-mile mistake by your parents. They should just cross the border. But I want to talk to you about that in 1 second. But if you were the president, if you had a magic wand and you could, quote, cure the energy situation in this country. And by the way, please do what you're doing in New Jersey. That's where I live. I pay electricity rates here, and I thank Governor Sherrill for all she's doing for that. I wish you luck. You have the magic wand. What are you going to do?
Well, one, I would reinstate the tax credits for clean energy so that because we need a lot more generation. There were a long period of time when our energy demand was flat. Now it's going through the roof. And we want to be able to encourage that and encourage the public-private partnerships to be able to do that. I would also really focus on a goal of, as I say, these virtual power plants to be able to take advantage of that headroom on the grid. I would incentivize states to change their business models, their utility business models, to reward utilities for being more efficient with the grid that we have rather than what we're doing. I would absolutely continue the tax credits for manufacturing in this country because really, we've got to be able to do that. We've got to be able to be strong as a nation. I would re-enter the Paris Accord. I would re-enter international organizations where we're all in this together and moving forward together. I would invest in our labs and our infrastructure associated with research and development, et cetera. Those were all super important, and those cuts have had an impact. This is all wearing my energy hat, of course.
Right.
There's a lot more to do,
Of
but
course.
I would, the trajectory we were on accelerated would be, I think, super smart for whoever the next president is.
Last question. I've asked a number of people who were former cabinet members about being the designated survivor. You never had that experience. Did you talk to your colleagues about it? Are you sorry you
Oh,
never had that
yeah. Well,
experience?
they couldn't have me have it because I was
Of
born in
course.
Canada, right? So I was bummed. But on the other hand, if you are the designated survivor, you don't get to go to the State of the Union. And
Right. Right.
and that's always extremely interesting and fun to do. So, the poor folks who do it, they're playing cards or whatever while this is happening, and it's not
Well,
so
I
much
had
fun.
I had Secretary Glickman on, and he went into a long explanation of what he did that night, and
Oh,
it's just
really?
absolutely hysterical. Yeah,
That is so
absolutely
funny.
hysterical,
That
and
is
he
so funny.
and he is great. By the way, I don't know if I've ever told you. I probably did. I worked for a Michigan congressman 100 years ago,
Who did you work
um,
for again?
Bob Traxler,
Oh my gosh. Oh my
Bingo
gosh.
Bob. Yeah,
I knew of him. Yes.
yeah, a long time
Uh,
ago.
yeah.
I was a kid. Listen, you've been so generous with your time as you have been with your friendship over more than 20 years.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just know how much I appreciate it, how much I appreciate all you've done, how much you have done to keep us safer and cleaner and better and looking towards the future. And, I like to tell my guests, when I say thank you, but remember, stay unconventional.
Look at you.
Well,
Well,
thank you, Governor.
thanks.
Thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. I'm going to finish with some quick concluding remarks, if you don't mind. I'll be fast. Look, for you folks at home, it's really rare, especially in today's world, to have a leader who has the insight and courage to truly lead. I mean, we see this constantly. And here's a person who took her state and the country in a different direction than it was necessarily going, but it was a necessary direction. And to have a vision and a plan and actually implement it is something rare in these days and times. And you just heard from one. You heard from someone who does it, Jennifer Granholm. If I were to describe my guest in one word, it would be transformational, because Jennifer Granholm has personally transformed the energy landscape in this country. And that's why I wanted you to hear from her today. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I'm struck by the fact that President Jimmy Carter, a long time ago, 1977, 1979, talked about an energy transformation for this country. And we never got there. We never did it, really, until Secretary Granholm was doing it. We did little pieces of it along the way. But he talked about this 50 years ago, and we didn't get there. And we need to get there. In many ways, the United States has squandered this time, and we could have made a greater transformation than we have. And we know we need to do it. It's the only way to be sustainable going forward, to not only be good for the planet, but to be good for our economy. And Jennifer Granholm has been a leader in trying to do this her entire life, and has dedicated her life to this. So, long way of saying, hey, Congress, it's time. Let's get going. Let's get back to where we need to go. There's a lot more that needs to be done on the energy world, and that we need to do to get our energy where it needs to be. Listen to what Jimmy Carter said a long time ago. Listen to what Jennifer Granholm has said. Well, listen, everybody, thank you. That's all the time we have for today. I greatly appreciate you being listening to us on Unconventional Times. You could hear us wherever you get your podcasts, or you could watch us on YouTube at UT-Richard Gordon. Until next time, I'm Richard Gordon. Stay unconventional.
You've been listening to Unconventional Times with your host, Richard Gordon. Check out all of the episodes of Unconventional Times on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. To learn more about Richard Gordon and all of his unconventional conversations, head on over to unconventionaltimes.com. Thanks for listening.